Hi, I'm Capuano, and today's special is the incredible Dr. Markesan, perhaps the scariest episode on the television series Thriller. If you haven't seen this series yet, I highly recommend doing so at your earliest convenience. But you most definitely need to check out this ghoulish episode that aired on NBC television in 1962. What Stephen King once called the best series of its kind up to that point, Thriller was an anthology that ran for 2 seasons from 1960 to 1962, right around the time the original Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents were airing on television, bringing sci-fi, suspense, and yes, horror to the small screens in living rooms across the United States. It was hosted by horror icon Boris Karloff, and while some of Thriller's episodes were of the mystery and suspense variety at first, it eventually steered more into the horror genre as the series went on under producer William Fry, after his predecessors Fletcher Markle and Maxwell Shane moved on. The show soon became known for some truly horrifying stories, with scenes that could keep the insomnia machine running on full. And there is no better example of that than the incredible Dr. Markesan. Originally aired as Season 2, Episode 22 on February 26, 1962, it starts with young and financially strapped couple Fred and Molly Bancroft searching for jobs and a place to stay when they stop at Fred's dear uncle's run-down mansion. After some bickering, they make their way inside the building, and it's within the first couple of minutes we already know by the look of the place, both on the outside and on the inside, that something ghastly is just around the corner. But if the place doesn't convince you of this already, then Uncle Conrad's appearance most certainly will. As our gracious host, Boris Karloff himself, standing amongst the fog and shadows of the nearby cemetery, states in a cheeky manner,
"You know, there's something vaguely familiar about that Dr. Markesan. Creepy, sinister sort of chap, don't you agree?"
Initially refusing, Dr. Conrad Markesan finally acquiesces, but only on one condition. The couple must remain inside their room every night from dusk until dawn. Naturally, the desperate couple agrees to the terms. Well, more like Fred agrees, because Molly just wants to get the heck out of there. Smart girl. But Fred promises to be out of the old man's mangled hair once they find jobs and then get a place of their own. Dear old Uncle Markesan, Mr. M.D. himself, however, locks the couple's door from the outside, imprisoning them each night just in case they can't be trusted to keep their promise while he roams the estate through the foggy grounds below. Turns out Markesan was right, because that's a little too much for the Bancrofts. Fred decides to try and unlock the door, which he succeeds after many attempts, and makes his way through the dark hallways until he comes upon his uncle hosting some ghoulish guests who appear to be barely alive. In fact, they aren't alive at all. This gem of horror television would mark the 5th and final episode of the Thriller series, where Karloff not only hosted, but also played a character in the story, and they saved the best of them for last. Like most television anthologies, Thriller featured many actors making their way up the showbiz ladder, like William Shatner, Mary Tyler Moore, Cloris Leachman, and Elizabeth Montgomery. The Bancrofts are played by Dick York and Carolyn Carney. York and Elizabeth Montgomery would end up working together on the first 5 seasons of Bewitched, starting in 1964, the absolute high points of their respective careers. There were a lot of crossovers of the same actors appearing on Thriller, The Twilight Zone, and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. York and Carney actually played another couple on an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents just 3 months earlier than this broadcast. They played Tom and Julie Barton for the Season 7 episode called You Can't Be a Little Girl All Your Life. Both shows were airing on Tuesday nights on NBC during the 1960 to 1961 season, something that eventually led to the cancellation of Thriller. More on that in a minute. Director Robert Florey had a prodigious output of feature films in the 1930s and 1940s, with films such as Murders in the Rue Morgue and The Beast with Five Fingers. But by this time, he had relegated the final stretch of his career from film to television work. Still, he makes the horror effective, with his direction reminiscent of a Universal monster feature, particularly for a down-upward close shot of Dr. Markesan declaring his almighty powers to his nephew, very much like some shots found in Whale's Bride of Frankenstein. This moment is significant not only because of Karloff's casting as a mad doctor with a god complex, but because of Florey's own history with the 1931 film Frankenstein. See, Florey was the original choice to direct Frankenstein, with Bela Lugosi to play the monster. The rumor was that Lugosi ended up not wanting the part due to his face hidden by the makeup and the lack of dialogue for his character. But the truth is most likely because the test footage Florey had done with Lugosi ended up unsatisfactory for producer Carl Laemmle Jr., who then fired both Florey and Lugosi in favor of the Whale and Karloff team. As a token of appeasement, however, Laemmle gave Florey and Lugosi Murders in the Rue Morgue instead. Back to Thriller. Helping Florey with this episode was cinematographer Ben H. Klein, who also had a film career in the 1930s and 40s before moving on to the new television medium in the 1950s. Years later, his son, Richard, would follow in his father's footsteps by becoming a cinematographer for films like Soylent Green, The Fury, and the 1976 version of King Kong. Makeup artist Jack Barron, who had recently worked with Alfred Hitchcock on Psycho and would later work with the iconic director on Marnie and Torn Curtain, provided the ghoulish makeup here a mere 6 years before Marilyn Eastman and Carl Hardman provided a similar-looking Living Dead for Romero's Night of the Living Dead. Donald S. Sanford, whose biggest hit was the huge ensemble war film Midway, later in 1976, adapted the short story Colonel Markesan by August Derleth and Mark Schorer. It had been written in 1931 and originally published in the June 1934 issue of Weird Tales magazine. The Incredible Dr. Markesan often tops lists of Thriller's best episodes, and as a series, Thriller is often mentioned in many retrospectives of favorite television horror anthologies. Thriller was popular enough that producers started to expand the franchise much like The Twilight Zone, with soundtracks from both seasons and a comic book that ran all the way until the end of 1979, albeit under a different title of Boris Karloff, Tale of Mystery, once the TV series was canceled. And why was it canceled, you may ask? In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock Presents moved from CBS to NBC, where Thriller had its home, and, as you recall, both began airing on the same Tuesday night. Alfred Hitchcock Presents at 8:30 and Thriller at 9. Hitchcock did not like having to share the same space and made it known to NBC executives, who then moved Thriller to Monday nights at 10 p.m. for its second season, and the series began to suffer in the ratings as a result. After 2 seasons and 67 episodes, Thriller was canceled, while Alfred Hitchcock Presents continued onward. To add insult to injury, the following year after Thriller was canceled, Hitchcock ended up moving his show back to CBS for an hour-long version called The Alfred Hitchcock Hour. Thriller episodes can be found on YouTube and some streaming apps today, but thankfully it can also be found on physical media. What makes The Incredible Dr. Markesan worthy of the menu is the dark and creepy atmosphere, the acting performances of which Karloff is a delight, the glimpses of what would eventually evolve into the flesh-eating ghouls of the Romero universe, and that final shocking and frightening scene that I still can't believe they allowed on early 1960s television.